The courtroom was packed with people, their voices buzzing like restless bees until the sharp crack of the judge's gavel silenced them. The tension in the air was so thick that every cough, every shifting chair, and every nervous breath felt magnified. All eyes were on the young woman standing at the witness stand. Her hands trembled as she clutched the wooden railing, and her face was pale under the harsh lights of the courtroom. She looked small, fragile, like a lone flower trapped in the middle of a storm. The case had already captured the attention of the entire town, spreading far beyond its borders. Newspapers carried the story every day, reporters lined the halls waiting for the next twist, and whispers filled coffee shops and offices as people speculated about the truth. But no one expected the trial to come down to her. She had been quiet through most of the proceedings, only answering the lawyers with the bare minimum, her voice barely audible. But now the defense had pushed her testimony to the center stage, and the judge himself leaned forward, impatient and stern, demanding that she speak up. "Miss Carter," the judge said, his voice booming across the courtroom, "this court cannot function on whispers and silence. Speak clearly. The truth must be heard." The woman swallowed hard, her throat tight, her lips trembling as if words themselves had turned into heavy stones. For a moment it seemed like she might faint, and the bailiff stepped forward slightly, just in case she fell. The crowd murmured again, restless, curious, sensing that whatever she was about to say could change everything. She had been the only person in the room the night the incident happened, the one moment that had left the community divided. Some believed the man on trial was guilty, others believed he was innocent. Evidence was inconclusive, the lawyers fought bitterly, and it all came down to this woman's testimony. But until now, she had said almost nothing of significance, and the court grew frustrated with her timid, quiet answers. The judge banged his gavel again. "Miss Carter, this is your final chance. Speak the truth so that justice may be served." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your heart beat loud in your ears. Even the defense attorney, who had been confident and smug for weeks, now leaned forward, eyes narrowed, waiting. The young woman took a shaky breath, her voice so faint at first that only those closest could hear. He said. She stopped, closed her eyes tightly, then forced herself to continue. Her voice cracked, but the words that left her lips carried a weight that no one could have prepared for. He said, "If I ever told the truth, he would kill me, and that night, I watched him do it." A collective gasp erupted in the courtroom, the sound echoing like a wave crashing against the walls. People shifted in their seats, some even covering their mouths in shock. The defendant, who had been sitting calmly, suddenly stiffened, his face losing its composure. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but the man's eyes burned with fury as he glared at her, the mask of innocence he had worn for weeks, slipping in that single moment. The judge froze, his hand still gripping the gavel midair. The prosecutors exchanged looks of stunned relief while the defense scrambled to recover. Reporters in the back rushed to scribble notes, their pens flying across paper, knowing this was the revelation they had been waiting for. The woman's whisper had shattered the balance of the trial. For years, she had lived under his shadow, too terrified to speak, too fragile to fight back. She had carried the weight of fear in silence, her heart bound by the memory of that night. But now, in front of an entire courtroom, she had broken free. Her words, though soft, carried the power of thunder. The judge leaned forward, his stern eyes now softened, studying her carefully. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quieter. "Now, are you saying you witnessed the crime with your own eyes?" Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. "Yes, I saw him take her life." The defense attorney jumped up, objecting loudly, his voice breaking the heavy silence like a jagged blade. "Objection, Your Honor. This is fabricated, coerced, unreliable testimony. She's clearly unstable. But the judge raised his hand sharply, cutting him off. The power of her words was too strong to be ignored. The bailiff moved closer to the defendant, as if already sensing danger in the man's reaction. The jury leaned forward, their eyes wide, some with mouths slightly open. They had listened to days of dry testimony, endless exhibits, and conflicting stories. But now, in a single whisper, everything shifted. The scales of justice tipped violently, and there was no going back. The woman stood taller now, as though a weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, she was no longer silent. Every tremble in her body was matched with a growing strength in her eyes. She looked directly at the defendant, and in that gaze, everyone in the room could see the truth she carried. The man on trial tried to regain his composure, but his breathing quickened, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, fear flickered across his face. He knew her words had pierced through the walls of his lies, reaching the very core of the jury's hearts. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a theater of revelation, where silence was broken and fear gave way to courage. The judge, still holding his gavel but no longer needing to strike it, addressed the room. "This testimony will not be dismissed. The truth has found its voice." In that instant, the entire atmosphere of the trial transformed. Reporters scribbled frantically, spectators whispered in disbelief, and the jury's faces hardened with resolve. The woman, who had once been overlooked and underestimated, now stood as the most powerful person in the room. Her whisper had frozen the courtroom, not because it was loud, but because it carried the weight of truth, fear, and courage all at once. It was the whisper of someone who had endured pain in silence, only to finally break free. And though the trial would continue for days, though evidence would still be presented and arguments made, everyone knew the verdict had already shifted. That whisper would echo long after the courtroom emptied, long after the newspapers ran their headlines, long after the judge read his final ruling. It was the moment when justice turned on a fragile voice, the moment when silence broke, the moment when the truth no longer hid in the shadows. And as the judge finally lowered his gavel, calling the court to order once more, everyone in that room knew they had witnessed not just a trial, but history itself.